The morning of March 2022 began with an unusual stir in Pittston, Pennsylvania. Four unmarked SUVs quietly pulled up in front of a small mechanic shop at the end of Main Street. Neighbors peeked through curtains as FBI agents in bulletproof vests fanned out around the building, their movements slow and precise. Inside, Charles Benton, 64, was brewing his morning coffee, a habit he'd kept for over 40 years as a gentle mechanic, a kind neighbor, and a devoted member of the First Baptist Church. A knock came at exactly 6:45 a.m., Charles Benton, Pennsylvania State Police. "We have a warrant for your arrest in connection with the murder of Mary Ann Hollis in 1979. One of the agents later recounted that Benton's hand trembled slightly as he set down his coffee mug, but his eyes remained calm, vacant, as if he'd known this moment would come sooner or later, only it took 43 years. Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest cases. On the evening of October 14, 1979, the town of Chestnut Hollow, Pennsylvania, was steeped in the chill of early winter. Snow fell lightly on gray rooftops, tiny flakes glinting under the yellowish glow of streetlights. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the cold air from the Susquehanna River, creating the familiar atmosphere of the Northeast. As autumn faded, at the First Baptist Church, the fall festival had just ended, laughter still echoing in the parking lot. Mary Ann Hollis, 17, wearing a green sweater and a white scarf, wheeled her silver Raleigh bicycle out of the churchyard. She waved goodbye to friends, her dark hair dusted with snow, then turned onto Maple Hollow Road toward home. As the church's clock tower struck 9:47, she pedaled across the small wooden bridge over a shallow creek, a bridge that creaked under every winter's passing wheels. A delivery truck rumbled by in the opposite direction, its headlights sweeping across the water, casting the shadow of the slender girl onto the bridge's railing. In that moment, her white breath dissolved into the air, and that was the last image anyone ever saw of her. Less than a mile away, Elaine Hollis poured another cup of tea, her eyes fixed on the window. Every sound outside, a tire slipping on snow, the wind whistling through the trees, made her look up. She reassured herself that her daughter was just lingering to help clean up after the festival, that a slight delay was nothing unusual on a cold autumn night. But as time passed, the house grew quieter, filled only with the soft ticking of the clock and the cold tea on the table. A vague unease crept into her heart, the kind of instinct a mother feels when something is wrong. She threw on a sweater, rushed to knock on neighbors' doors, asking if anyone had seen Mary Ann leave the church. No one knew. Only one person vaguely recalled hearing a truck speed over the bridge in the snowy wind. That answer left Elaine's hands ice cold, despite standing in a heated home. When she returned, she shakily picked up the phone, her breath rapid, her voice breaking. "My daughter hasn't come home." Outside, the snow fell steadily, blanketing the road to the bridge. In the houses nearby, lights stayed on unusually late, a small town beginning to stir with an unnamed dread. To the north, a train's whistle echoed faintly, like the sound of something leaving forever. From that night on, Chestnut Hollow never slept soundly again. At 6 the next morning, fog still hung thick over the wet rooftops. Sheriff Edward Lang arrived at the Hollis home in a heavy brown coat, his breath steaming in the cold air. He was used to late-night calls, drunken brawls, petty theft, but something in Elaine Hollis's voice on the phone made him pause. The Hollis house sat at the end of a sloping road, the faint tire tracks of a bicycle still visible in last night's snow. Lang stepped into the small living room, where Elaine sat motionless at the dining table, a cold coffee mug in front of her, eyes sunken from a sleepless night. On the table was a photo of Mary Ann, taken that summer, her smile radiant in a white dress. Lang pulled out his notebook, his voice low and rough. "Tell me again about the last time you saw your daughter." Elaine recounted. Mary Ann left at 7:30 p.m., wearing a green sweater, white scarf, gray sneakers, and a silver necklace engraved with MH, a 16th birthday gift. She took her silver Raleigh bicycle, no bag, no money. She said she was just going to help clean up after the church party, and would be back early. Elaine said, her voice breaking. She never stays out overnight, never. Lang jotted down every detail, his hand trembling slightly from the cold. He radioed the patrol unit, ordering a sweep of the area around Maple Hollow Bridge and the Susquehanna River. 2 young officers headed north. Another team fanned out into the southern woods. The local radio station aired a brief bulletin. A teenage girl from Chestnut Hollow went missing last night. If you have any information, contact the police station. By noon, the usually quiet town began to stir strangely. People stood on porches, gathered at the general store, whispering. Everyone had something to say. I heard a truck pass by the bridge. I saw lights near the woods. Maybe she ran off with a boyfriend. Rumors spread faster than the wind. Lang hated that feeling, when gossip overtook truth, and everyone spun their own story. He went to the First Baptist Church, where the fall festival had taken place. The wooden floor still bore shoe marks, the air scented with apple pie and candle wax. Pastor James Monroe said Mary Ann stayed to help clean up with a few friends, leaving around 10. A girl named Lisa said she saw Mary Ann tie her scarf around her neck and say, "It's colder than I thought." Then she rode off. No one saw anything after that. On Maple Hollow Bridge, the search team found fresh tire tracks in the snow, mixed with small footprints. A man reported hearing a truck's engine around 10, speeding, its headlights glaring. Lang crouched to inspect the bridge, his hand brushing a cold, wet crack. No blood, no signs of a struggle. Just an absence, where a girl had once passed. By afternoon, snow began falling again. Lang set up a small tent as a command post. He noted every location, sketched a map by hand, and marked potential search areas with red pins. Volunteers from the church, school, and neighbors brought flashlights and blankets. They fanned out along the riverbank, calling her name into the cold wind. "Mary Ann," echoed, then faded into the fog. Back at the Hollis house, Elaine sat by the window, listening to the wind lash the glass, still clutching the phone. Each ring made her jump, hope rising, then crashing. When Lang returned, he said softly, "We'll find her, Mrs. Hollis, I promise." Elaine looked at him, eyes red. "My daughter didn't run away, Sheriff. Someone took her." Lang didn't reply. He knew in missing persons cases, a mother's instinct was often more accurate than any report. As night fell over Chestnut Hollow, patrol lights swept the snowy roads. People went home but didn't truly sleep. In the town, Mary Ann Hollis's name began to sound like both a prayer and a fear. The next morning, snow fell heavier, blanketing rooftops, fields, and the bridge where Mary Ann was believed to have last passed. Sheriff Lang organized the largest search Chestnut Hollow had ever seen. Over 40 people, police, high school students, churchgoers, neighbors, gathered at the old gas station used as a staging point. Each received a photocopied map, a flashlight, and a whistle. Lang stood before them, voice low, serious. "We search every inch, every bush. If you see anything odd, clothing, shoes, tracks, report it immediately. No one goes alone." He divided them. One group scoured both sides of Maple Hollow Road. Another followed the Susquehanna River, where ice was forming. Thick fog and cold air made breathing hard. Flashlights cut through a white haze. The crunch of fresh snow underfoot sounded like the earth's sigh. To the north, Lang walked with 2 young officers, eyes scanning the road curving under the bridge. Tire tracks appeared, then vanished in the snow. He knelt, touching a clear tread, feeling the snow inside hadn't frozen, meaning it was recent, hours old. Someone shouted from the bushes, "I found something." Everyone rushed over. Under an old oak, a silver rolly bicycle lay tilted, its front wheel caught in roots, the seat dusted with snow. Lang brushed off the thin layer, flipping the bike upright. On the handlebars, a green ribbon tangled in the spokes, fluttering lightly, as if waving. The rear wheel was scratched, the chain off its sprocket, the pedal slightly bent. No blood, no drag marks, no signs of a struggle nearby. Just the bike, quiet, and out of place. Lang noted the location, staked a marker, and had it photographed. He stared at it for a long time, a chill rising in him, as if Mary Ann had dissolved into the snow, leaving only this sign. The search team spread farther. Each time someone picked up a scrap of fabric or a broken branch, everyone held their breath, then exhaled in disappointment. Along the river, thin ice was forming, the water below sluggish. A police dog sniffed around the bridge, barking hoarsely, then whining when its nose touched a white scarf, caught between two wooden planks. Lang rushed over, picking it up. It was Mary Ann's, with a brown hair clinging to the edge. No signs of a struggle, no blood. He carefully sealed it in a plastic bag. The more details they found, the more contradictory it seemed, as if the girl had vanished on that short stretch of road. By afternoon, daylight faded quickly, dense fog cloaking the hills. Lang blew the whistle to regroup. Faces were flushed from cold, coats soaked with melted snow. A student whispered, "If it gets darker, we'll lose each other." Lang nodded. "Tomorrow, we start early. Tonight, we stop here." They packed up their lights and left in groups. As they departed, Maple Hollow Bridge lay silent in the snowy haze, like a cold scar. Patrol lights swept over, their yellow glow sliding across the water, then fading. Lang glanced back at the woods, where flashlight beams flickered like dim stars. Something heavy settled in him, not just fear of not finding the girl, but a sense of some darkness watching from afar, through the misty snow. As he got in his car, the clock read nearly 7 p.m. Snow fell thicker, heavy flakes swallowing all sound. Lang turned on his headlights, backed away from the bridge, the rearview mirror showing only the green ribbon swaying under the yellow light, small and alone in the endless white. The search paused in silence. Snow kept falling, covering every trace, and the faint hope that Mary Ann was just lost. On the morning of October 24th, 1979, 10 days after Mary Ann Hollis vanished, the snow had melted into a muddy slush, covering the town's roads. A weak autumn sun pierced thick clouds, shining down on the abandoned Nanticoke coal mine, a once vital artery of Luzerne County, now just dark tunnels, rusted fences, and chest-high weeds. Donald Pierce, a 45-year-old local hunter, often came here each season for rabbits and foxes. He walked with his old hunting dog, Duke, rifle slung over his shoulder, moving slowly through what used to be a coal transport path. The air was cold, smelling of metal and damp rot. Near 8 a.m., Duke barked loudly, straining at his leash, sniffing toward thick grass on a slope's edge. Donald thought it was a dead animal, but as he approached, he saw something else, a pale hand protruding from the wet soil, nails caked with mud, a wrist wrapped in frayed white fabric. Donald staggered back, heart pounding. He knew instantly he'd found what the town had dreaded for 10 days. 3 minutes later, he stood trembling by his pickup, fumbling to dial Sheriff Lang. His voice broke. I think I found that girl at the Nanticoke mine." Lang arrived with 2 officers and the state forensics team. The road to the mine was narrow, winding, and muddy. Police cars stopped half a mile away. They walked the rest, mud clinging to their boots. When Lang saw the disturbed earth amid the grass, he knew Donald wasn't mistaken. The body lay tilted, half buried in damp soil, dark brown hair matted with mud, the green sweater reduced to tattered scraps. The neck bore deep purple bruises, the hand clutching dried grass. Lang stood silent for a moment, his breath a faint vapor. Around the girl's neck, a silver necklace with MH engraved, caught the faint autumn light. A young officer turned away, whispering, "God, it's her." Lang said nothing. He removed his hat, bowed his head briefly, then ordered the area sealed. The forensics team spread a blue tarp around the scene, setting up a small tent to shield against rain. They photographed, noted the body's position, and marked muddy footprints. One large, deep print led toward a trail to the highway. Lang crouched, examining it, muttering, "Looks like Red Wing boots," then turned to his assistant. "Mark it, measure the depth." Wind from the hills carried the smell of wet coal and decay. Duke, Donald's dog, let out a long howl, chilling the mind's air. By 9, an ambulance and county coroner's van arrived. A reporter from the Times-Leader, tipped off via police radio, followed. Soon, local TV crews showed up. As the forensics team lifted the body onto a stretcher, camera shutters clicked across the field, flashes piercing the fog. A news helicopter from Wilkes-Barre circled overhead, its blades stirring dust and grass. Lang shouted angrily, "Turn off those cameras, get out of here." But it was too late. Within hours, the news spread across Pennsylvania, the evening broadcast headlining, "Female body found at Nanticoke mine, suspected to be missing girl from last week." At noon, Lang returned to the scene after the body was removed. Snow gone, the ground revealed muddy patches and tangled grass. He looked around, black coal piles, crumbled chimneys, a desolate landscape, as if the land itself had died long ago. He thought of Elaine Hollis, the mother still waiting by her window each night, and knew that in a few hours he'd have to knock on her door with the cruelest truth. Lang stood still, eyes on the horizon where coal hills rose in the fog, and whispered, "I'm sorry, kid." That afternoon, at the Hollis house, Lang entered with his hat in hand. Elaine didn't need his words. His eyes told her everything. Her sobs filled the house, echoing through the windows, blending with the howling wind outside. Lang stood silent, head bowed. In his years as a cop, he'd seen accidents, fires, deaths, but never a despair as heavy as in that mother's eyes. As the sun set, the town had heard the news. People gathered at the church, lighting candles, praying. Bells tolled through the evening, their mournful sound spreading across the valley. On TV, images of the mine aired, cold ground, a stretcher under a blue tarp, carried through a crowd in heavy coats. Parents told kids, "Don't go out after dark." An old woman in the diner whispered, "I've lived here 40 years, never seen Chestnut Hollow this sad." On the northern hill, snow had stopped, the sky clear but freezing. Patrol lights flashed on the road to the mine. Wind swept through the pines, carrying the sharp scent of metal and the church bells' echo. In that moment, the town seemed to hold its breath. The snow had stopped, but the silence was heavier than ever. The Wilkes-Barre County Coroner's Office sat in the basement of an old administrative building. Its brick walls painted gray, small windows fogged with condensation. On the morning of October 25, 1979, cold fluorescent lights illuminated a stainless steel table where Mary Ann Hollis's body lay motionless under a white sheet. The air was thick with the smell of disinfectant and metal. Dr. Harold Grayson, the county's chief coroner, a salt and pepper-haired man with thick glasses, began the autopsy at 8:17 a.m. Sheriff Edward Lang stood behind the observation glass, hands in his coat pockets, face tense. Grayson meticulously recorded details on a typewriter atop a metal desk. He spoke softly, his voice steady like a prayer. Female victim, approximately 17 years old, 5 feet 5 inches tall, weighed approximately 115 pounds. Estimated time of death, 10 to 12 days ago, consistent with the reported date of disappearance. He brushed the victim's hair aside, pointing to dark bruises encircling her neck like a tightened cord. Death by mechanical asphyxiation. Deep ligature marks suggest strangulation with a soft object, possibly a fabric or scarf. He measured the bruise's width with a ruler, carefully snapping Polaroid photos, then continued examining the chest and arms. Abrasions on the right arm, possibly from contact with a hard surface, and bruising on the knees. Grayson paused, removed his gloves, adjusted his glasses, and said quietly, "Signs of sexual assault." The room fell silent. Lang closed his eyes briefly, then opened his notebook and jotted a few lines. Grayson collected fluid and hair samples, placing them in small glass vials with tweezers, sealing them with yellow tape labeled 79 Hollis and the date. "We'll send these to the Harrisburg lab for blood type analysis," he said. "There's nothing more we can do here. DNA is the future, and the future isn't here yet." He turned to Lang, his voice lowering. If he left nothing else, I'm afraid we're left with intuition. Lang nodded. He was used to this small-town cases with no witnesses, no advanced equipment, just faith in people and fragile guesses. After the autopsy, the body was moved to another table for identification photos. The silver necklace engraved with MH was removed, cleaned, and placed in a sealed envelope. Grayson noted in the file, Exhibit 1, silver necklace. Exhibit 2, fragment of green sweater. Exhibit 3, white scarf found at the bridge. He examined the fabric's edge under a microscope, spotting tiny black fibers coated with oil. Comparing them, he found they resembled engine lubricant. The perpetrator might be a mechanic, he said, or was in a place with heavy machinery oil. Lang wrote it down, picturing the small repair shop off Route 309 where young mechanic Charlie Benton worked. The crime scene team sent Grayson notes about a shoe print found at the Nanticoke mine. The print was 0.8 inches deep, 12 inches long, size approximately 10, with a wavy sole pattern typical of Red Wing boots, common among local workers. Grayson shone a light, comparing it to other prints in the county's outdated paper database, but found no specific match. He sighed, reaching for a cigarette, then remembered the no-smoking rule. All we have, he said, is a shoe print and some fibers. They say a lot, but not enough to charge anyone. Lang looked at Mary Ann's body one last time before it was prepared for burial. Under the white light, her face looked peaceful, as if asleep. Her dark brown hair was matted with mud, a faint purple bruise at the corner of her mouth. His throat tightened. We won't let her be forgotten, he said softly. Grayson draped the sheet back, nodding. I hope you're right. Outside, the hallway was frigid. The typewriter's clatter echoed from the next room, where a clerk typed reports. Each keystroke on white paper sounded as sharp as nails sealing a coffin. Lang paused at a board listing unsolved cases, dozens of yellowed papers pinned up. He added a new one, Case #79 Hollis. Below, he scribbled, Pending investigation, unresolved. As he left the building, night had fallen, and a light drizzle speckled the empty Wilkes-Barre street. Street lights reflected on the wet pavement, their glow blurred like an indelible stain. That evening, Lang returned to his small office in Chestnut Hollow. He brewed coffee, sat at his desk, turned on the lamp, and reread the file. In a Polaroid, the silver necklace gleamed, the MH engraving sharp. He thought of the mother sitting alone at home, and wondered what could drive someone to take the life of such a kind girl. At the desk's corner, his old Remington typewriter clacked as he typed the first line of a report to the state. Cause of death, strangulation, with a soft object. Signs of sexual assault. Male size 10 shoe print, fabric with engine oil. Fluid samples sealed in glass vials, sent to Harrisburg lab for blood typing. No specific suspects. He paused, rubbing his forehead. The typing stopped, leaving a lingering silence. Somewhere in the night, wind whistled through pines, a distant train whistle echoing. Lang looked out the window. Snow had stopped, but a different cold was forming inside him. Charlie Benton lived on the west side of town, in a small wooden house less than 2 miles from the First Baptist Church. At 21, he worked at Old Man Thompson's garage off Highway 309, fixing trucks for local coal mines. Everyone in Chestnut Hollow knew Benton. A quiet, diligent young man, hands always stained with oil, always ready to help neighbors with spark plugs or tire patches without asking for payment. His mother died young. His father, a former miner, left him the old house and a small settlement after an accident. Benton lived alone, ate simply, and evenings often found him on his porch, smoking and listening to a staticky AM radio in the wind. When Lang read the coroner's note about fabric with engine oil, he thought immediately of mechanics. Benton's name stood out on that short list. Lang and young officer Roy Evers visited the garage on a cold afternoon, fog clouding the windows. Benton was under an old pickup, wrench clanking. Seeing the police, he wiped his hands on a rag, stood, and asked calmly, "Something wrong, Sheriff?" Lang studied him. A sturdy young man with cold gray eyes and a direct gaze, unflinching. "We want to ask about Mary Ann Hollis." Lang said slowly. Did you know her? Benton nodded. Yeah, I fixed their family car a few times. Nice girl, sweet. I don't know what happened. Lang took notes, pressing, Where were you the night of October 14th? Benton answered instantly without pause. Home. Got back around 7. Ate dinner, worked on a broken radio. Neighbors can vouch. I went to bed early. His voice was steady, eyes unblinking. Lang asked, Did you leave the house that night? Go near Maple Hollow Road? Benton frowned, shaking his head. No, no reason to. I heard about her disappearance on the radio the next morning. His answers were short, clear, almost rehearsed. Lang brought Benton to the station for formal questioning. In the interrogation room, fluorescent light cast a cold sheen on his face. Lang used the new polygraph machine from the state police, attaching heart rate wires to Benton's chest and sensors to his fingers. The technician asked in a monotone, Do you know Mary Ann Hollis? Yes. Did you see her on the night of October 14th? No. Were you involved in her death? No. The needle wavered slightly, then settled. The technician glanced at Lang, shaking his head. No reaction. After 3 hours, Lang found no cracks in Benton's story. The young man remained calm, polite, even smiling as if eager to help. Before leaving, Benton said, I'm really sorry for Mrs. Hollis. If there's any way I can help, I will. He shook Lang's hand, his grip cold and smelling of oil. As the door closed, Lang sat alone, staring at scattered notes. He had a bad feeling, the kind that had solved cases before. Everything about Benton was right. His job, his timeline, his alibi. But that perfection unsettled him. Coldly calm, Lang whispered, watching through the glass as Benton left, started his red Ford pickup and drove off. That night, Lang drove to Benton's neighborhood, parking a few hundred yards away. The wooden house was quiet, a faint yellow light glowing from the living room window. He sat in his car, smoking, listening to the wind howl through trees. Near 10, Benton turned off the light, his silhouette passing the curtains. Lang waited 20 minutes, then left. Nothing unusual, except the nagging sense that the mechanic was hiding something small, something only felt, not proven. The next day, police collected Benton's shoe prints, comparing them to the Nanticoke mines. The size matched, 10, but the sole pattern wasn't identical. The crime scene print was worn and distorted, too unclear for a conclusion. They searched his truck for mud or fabric traces, but found nothing suspicious. Everything was clean, as if freshly scrubbed. In his report, Lang wrote tersely, insufficient evidence to detain suspect. Continue monitoring. Benton was released that afternoon, walking out of the station with a calm expression. As he disappeared, Roy Evers asked quietly, You think he's really innocent? Lang stared out the window, where snow fell like ashes. I think, he said, he might be. But those eyes, he trailed off, voice hoarse. Those eyes don't belong to an ordinary person. That night, Lang returned to his office, opened the file, and placed Benton's photo next to Mary Ann's. She smiled brightly. He stared blankly into the garage ID camera, cold, empty. Lang closed the file, leaned back, recalling his father, a retired cop. Sometimes the only thing you've got is the chill at the back of your neck. Don't ignore it. Snow fell outside, covering the road to the church, and somewhere in Chestnut Hollow's darkness, the young man with calm eyes returned to work, wrench in hand, metal clanking steadily like the pulse of an untold secret. A week after Mary Ann's body was found, the Times leader ran a bold headline, Who killed Mary Ann Hollis? Below was a photo of the Hollis's snow-covered wooden house, its windows dim with light, captioned, A Pennsylvania Town Faces a Nightmare. The 2-page article detailed the night she vanished, Maple Hollow Bridge, the abandoned mine, and a mother's tears. But what weighed most on Sheriff Lang was the final line. Sources say police have no specific suspects. That single sentence sparked a storm of speculation across Chestnut Hollow. People talked everywhere, in the Main Street diner, the barber shop, even Sunday church services. Everyone had a story. I heard she fought with an ex-boyfriend, a woman said in the grocery store. No, another countered. I saw a strange truck parked near the bridge that night, probably a passing driver. Whispers grew into wild theories. Some said Mary Ann was killed by a drifter. Others blamed a stranger at the church festival. Police received dozens of anonymous calls, mostly false. I saw a man in a green jacket in the woods, or I heard screams in the night. All led nowhere. The Hollis house saw a constant stream of strangers, reporters, curious onlookers, even self-proclaimed psychics. Elaine Hollis lived in a haze of exhaustion, afraid to leave. She sat by the window, staring at the road where her daughter's search posters once hung, now just a faded green ribbon. Neighbors pitied but kept their distance, as if her grief was a taboo to avoid. At the market, people nodded quietly, then whispered behind her. Heard the girl had a suitor. Maybe the mother knows more than she's saying. Elaine heard it all but stayed silent. She knew gossip didn't kill, only eroded her daughter's memory. Lang tried to control the situation, but felt increasingly powerless. Newspapers called the police incompetent. He got dozens of calls daily from reporters in Harrisburg, Pittsburgh, even a Philadelphia radio station, all wanting an official comment. Lang only said, "The investigation is ongoing." He knew to the public, no suspect meant failure. At night he sat in his small office, lamplight falling on a map, dotted with red pins marking search locations, the shoe print, the bicycle's site. It was a maze with no exit. He flipped through Benton's file, rereading notes and statements, all too smooth to trust. Officer Roy Evers entered, holding coffee. "Nothing new. We rechecked drivers from that night. No one matches the timeline." Lang looked at him, weary. Every road leads to nothing. He lit a cigarette, smoke curling in the dim light. "I think about him constantly," he said softly. "Benton, no tremble, no blink. He knows we can't touch him." Roy started to speak, then stopped. Outside, wind hissed through the window, carrying faint church bells. Days later, temperatures dropped, snow burying paths. Search teams halted, the ground froze, the river iced over. The town felt trapped in an early winter. Lang drove past Maple Hollow Bridge often, staring at the black water, seeing his own aged reflection. The case became an obsession. He didn't just see Mary Ann, the bright-eyed girl, but Benton's blank stare every time he closed his eyes. Some nights, he dreamed of the mine, snow falling, and in the coal heaps, those eyes opened, watching him, calm, emotionless. In early November, the state police sent a notice, blood type results from the semen sample. Too generic. Type O, nearly half the U.S. population. It couldn't narrow suspects. Lang crumpled the paper, tossing it into the trash. He called the coroner's office, getting the same answer, "We did all we could." In that moment, he felt the case slipping away. At Mary Ann's funeral, snow fell heavily, church bells tolling. Nearly the whole town attended, bringing white chrysanthemums, crowding the small hillside cemetery. Lang stood in the back, hat on, silent. As the pastor prayed, he watched Elaine Hollis slump by the oak coffin, shoulders shaking. After the service, a young reporter asked, "Sheriff, when will we have answers?" Lang replied softly, "When the snow melts." But he didn't believe his own words. As dusk fell, the town sank into frost and wind. People went home, leaving Lang on the hill, watching snow cover the grave. Emptiness gnawed at him. The case stalled, rumors persisted, and in Pennsylvania's silent winter darkness, Chestnut Hollow was caught between fear and forgetting. Winter 1980 arrived early, blanketing Luzerne Valley in thick snow. Over a year since Mary Ann Hollis was found, Chestnut Hollow remained heavy, as if the cold never lifted. On Maple Hollow Bridge, the search's focal point, snow erased old scratches and tire tracks. Sheriff Lang still drove that road each morning, gazing at the frozen black river, thinking of the girl he couldn't bring justice to. He didn't say it, but everyone knew the case was stuck. New investigative efforts dwindled. State police sent specialists in early 1981, rechecking the scene, re-interviewing witnesses, but nothing changed. No new physical evidence, no new witness details. Time and snow had erased everything. Forensic samples stored in Harrisburg were useless. Blood typing wasn't enough to identify a killer. Charlie Benton remained a suspect, but without evidence, he was untouchable. Lang quietly watched the young mechanic, occasionally visiting the garage under the guise of routine checks. Benton was the same, calm, polite, eyes steady. The helplessness deepened Lang's gloom. In April 1981, the sheriff's department restructured. Lang, then 58 with 35 years of service, his hair fully white, was urged by Wilkes-Barre's superiors to retire early, to make room for the young. He nodded silently. On his last day, he cleared his desk's file drawer. In his hands was the thick Case #79 Hollis file, its cover yellowed, edges curled. Before handing it to the county office, he sat in his office an extra hour, rereading the final report, where he wrote, "Insufficient evidence. Investigation suspended." He signed with a trembling pen, set it down, feeling he'd closed a part of his life. Weeks later, Lang left Chestnut Hollow, moving to his daughter's in Harrisburg. On his final night in town, he drove to Maple Hollow Bridge, stopped in the middle, and stepped out. Light snow fell, wind carrying a damp chill through the forest. The dark water below reflected glinting ice under his headlights. He stood for a long time, looking north to the abandoned mine. As he got back in, he whispered, almost to himself, "I tried my best, kid." Around the same time, the Hollis family left town. Elaine sold their small Ridgewood Roadhouse cheaply, wanting to escape a place where every corner echoed her daughter's laughter. She moved to her sister's in Scranton, refusing all media interviews. Neighbors said the night before she left, she visited the cemetery alone, bringing white chrysanthemums, standing by Mary Ann's grave in the snow, silent. After she left, the house stood empty, windows shuttered. The green ribbon on the porch faded and broke in the wind. By the end of 1982, the Hollis case file was officially transferred to the Luzerne County Archives, joining hundreds of other unsolved cases. The storage room was a damp basement with brick walls, dim yellow light, and the mingled smell of old paper and rusted iron. A clerk placed the file on shelf 47, row 4, between two other unsolved murder cases. He labeled it, "Closed, pending." The iron door shut, its echo like a final punctuation. In the years that followed, people gradually stopped mentioning the case. At the diner, talk turned to baseball, coal prices, and the new road connecting Wilkes-Barre to Scranton. Children growing up later heard of Mary Ann Hollis only as a retold story, a beautiful girl who vanished in a snowy night and was found in an old mine. Maple Hollow Bridge remained, its railings replaced, but no one lingered there at night anymore. When winter came, the wind whistled through the wooden slats, sounding like a sigh of memory. Sometimes, the town's elders claimed to see a girl's silhouette biking across the bridge in the fog. A truck's headlights reflecting and then fading. People laughed, calling it a tale to scare kids. But for those who lived through that winter, the story wasn't just rumor. It was how they remembered and forgot at the same time. By the mid-1980s, the Mary Ann Hollis case was just a brief line in the state police's annual report. Female victim, 17 years old. Case unsolved. Snow fell steadily each season, burying all traces and what remained of a promise. In the basement archive, the Case #79 Hollis file sat silently under dust, its binding frayed, paper yellowed. No one touched it anymore, and in the thick silence of Pennsylvania winters, Chestnut Hollow gradually forgot, as if what happened to Mary Ann was merely a cold dream the town had passed through. 40 years later, Mary Ann Hollis's name lingered only in the hazy memories of Chestnut Hollow's older residents. Kids born in the 90s knew the story as local legend. The beautiful girl lost in a snowy night, her body found in an old coal mine, and since then, some claimed to see her shadow by Maple Hollow Bridge each winter. Time moved on. The town changed. The old diner became a gas station. The general store vanished, but the First Baptist Church still stood. Its tiled roof faded like its own memory. In 1990, as DNA technology emerged in U.S. forensic labs, some old cases were reopened. including Mary Ann Hollis's. A young Harrisburg forensic technician stumbled across a small glass vial containing the 1979 sealed semen sample in storage. He reported it to his superiors, hoping it could identify the killer. But preliminary tests showed the sample was too small and degraded from years in standard conditions, insufficient for the rudimentary DNA analysis of the time. The report back was a single line: sample inadequate for testing, store for future use. The vial was returned to its wooden box, placed in a pending research drawer, and forgotten again. Through the 90s and early 2000s, the Hollis case remained dormant, unmentioned. Chestnut Hollow's new sheriff didn't even know the town had once had an infamous murder case. Occasionally, when snow fell heavily, the story was retold to passers-by as a chilling anecdote to spook kids. Mary Ann's death became part of the landscape, like the old pines on the hill or Maple Hollow Road, present but no longer stopping anyone. In 2008, a major storm swept through Luzerne County, flooding the county police headquarters basement, where thousands of old files were stored. When the water receded, most documents were damp, moldy, or ruined. Many evidence envelopes were warped, their writing blurred. Archivists worked 3 months to sort the mess. Among the evidence, they found a wooden box labeled Case Hash 79 Hollis. It was soaked, but inside, the glass vial remained intact. Its rubber stopper hardened, the sealing tape still bearing Dr. Harold Grayson's signature. A young clerk, Lydia Moran, nearly discarded it with other damaged evidence, but seeing the faint handwritten note, "Keep sealed" DNA sample, she hesitated and set it aside. That small act saved the case's only remaining evidence from destruction, alongside hundreds of others. After that, the Hollis file was resealed and moved to Wilkes-Barre's Central Archive. New dust settled over old. Many in the younger police force only vaguely knew the case's name, uninterested. At the time, Pennsylvania faced a wave of drug crimes, robberies, and domestic violence. No one had time for a 40-year-old case. In spring 2019, in the Pennsylvania State Police Administrative Building in Harrisburg, stacks of old paper files lined the third-floor hallway. The stuffy air carried the scent of moldy paper and faded ink from yellowed documents, heavy with time. Agent Dana Ruiz, 33, newly promoted to the cold case unit, was among its youngest female investigators, with experience in the National CODIS DNA database. Born in Bethlehem to a Mexican immigrant cop, her father had taught her, a case never truly ends. It only pauses when someone stops believing. That mantra haunted her youth, and now, stepping into the dusty room of forgotten cases, she felt she was keeping an old promise to him. That morning, Ruiz was tasked with reviewing DNA-viable files for a digitization program. The list spanned over 300 cases from the 60s to 90s. She randomly pulled a thick file, its worn cover labeled Case Hash 79 Hollis, Wilkes-Barre County. The typed text was faded, edges frayed. She opened it, brittle pages rustling softly. The first report was Dr. Harold Grayson's autopsy. Typed on an old Remington, letters thin and slanted: female victim, 17, death by mechanical asphyxiation, signs of sexual assault, semen sample sealed in glass vial. Ruiz read each line, lamplight falling on inky words. A chill ran down her spine, not from fear, but from the sense of a distant voice whispering across 4 decades, the voice of the dead. She turned to the next page. Sheriff Edward Lang's report. The final line, scrawled in blue ink: insufficient evidence, investigation suspended. Ruiz set the paper down, looking through the dusty window. Outside March, Pennsylvania was gray, drizzling. In that moment, she thought of the girl's mother, likely aged or gone, still carrying an unanswered question. Ruiz closed the file, heart heavy. She knew there were hundreds like it, but something about the Hollis case gripped her. The coldness of its words, the writer's care, and one detail repeated in every report. The silver necklace engraved with MH. She jotted in her notebook, check DNA sample. That afternoon, Ruiz went to the central evidence room in Wilkes-Barre. It was cold, fluorescent lights flickering. metal cabinets in neat rows. The clerk handed her a small tray, holding a dark wooden box, labeled 79 Hollis. Opening it, dust and sawdust released a musty smell. Among discolored evidence bags, the small glass vial sat neatly in foam padding, its seal intact. The handwritten label faint. Sample sealed. Dr. H. Grayson, the 25th of October, 79. Ruiz lifted it carefully, holding it to the light. Inside was a tiny, pale yellow dried droplet, barely believable as something that could rewrite a case's history. She whispered, as if to herself, 40 years, and you're still here. Ruiz called her superior, Lieutenant Mark DeLuca, pitching her plan to send the sample to Parabon Nanolabs in Virginia, a pioneer in genetic genealogy, the method that cracked the Golden State Killer case in 2018. DeLuca hesitated. It's costly. Results aren't guaranteed, Ruiz. You sure this is worth it? She replied firmly. It is. If we don't try, we'll never know. A pause, then his voice. All right, you've got the green light. Ruiz smiled, signed the transfer form, personally packed the vial in an insulated box, and sealed it with tamper-proof tape. That evening, alone in her office, lamplight fell on black and white photos: Maple Hollow Bridge, Nanticoke Mine, the silver Rolly bicycle. She studied Mary Ann's graduation photo, radiant smile, bright eyes. 40 years ago, someone snuffed out that smile, then lived peacefully ever after. The thought stung. Ruiz closed the file, leaning back. Her mind flashed to other cases solved by a single hair, a drop of blood, a lingering cell. She believed if the sample held, today's tech could speak for the dead. 3 days later, the sample was shipped to Virginia by courier. Ruiz received Parabon's email. Sample received. Analysis to begin next week. Under the screen's blue glow, she stared at the words. Outside, the rain stopped, the city reflecting streetlights on wet pavement like streaks of time. She didn't know what she'd touched. A coincidence or the final thread tying past to present. Leaving the office, Ruiz paused at a bulletin board in the hallway, lined with hundreds of victim photos, unanswered. She looked at a faded one in the corner. Mary Ann Hollis, Pennsylvania, 1979. Below unsolved, someone had penciled, still waiting. Ruiz touched it lightly, whispering, I'm coming, kid. Just wait a bit longer. She turned off the light, leaving the room in silence. Only the hum of a fan, carrying the chill of a past awakened after 40 years. 6 months later, on a September 2019 morning, Agent Dana Ruiz's inbox showed a subject line from Parabon Nanolabs. Preliminary results. Case #79 Hollis. She opened it, holding her breath. The first lines were brief, but made her heart race. DNA sample successfully sequenced. Genetic markers indicate a third-degree familial match to a woman in Ohio, likely a distant relative of the suspect. Ruiz sank into her chair, staring at the glowing screen. After 40 years, the case, once frozen, had its first breath. She called Parabon to verify details. Dr. Evelyn Park, the geneticist, explained evenly. We matched the sample to the public GED match database. The relationship shares about 0.8% DNA, enough to trace a family tree with demographic data. Ruiz scribbled notes, excitement mixing with nerves. Evelyn added, the family is Hollister, Pennsylvania roots, moved to Ohio in the 1940s. The sample likely ties to the suspect's paternal line. If you build the genealogy, we'll know who he is. For weeks, Ruiz worked like she was possessed. She spread a large map on her desk, pinning red markers to Hollister family addresses, branching to New Jersey, Delaware, and back to Luzerne County. Using family tree DNA software and old demographic records, she built a 5-generation tree, over 200 people. Only 3 men lived in Pennsylvania in the late 70s, aged 18-30, matching the case profile. Ruiz marked 3 names in red ink: Charles Benton, Richard Lowe, and Daniel Hartley. She reopened the yellowed case file, reading Sheriff Lang's old reports. Benton's name stopped her. In a 1980 note, Lang's typed words stood out: Charles Benton, 21, mechanic. Insufficient evidence, but the hunch remains. Ruiz reread it, lips tight. A hunch, the only thing men like Lang had, now backed by tech he'd never lived to see. She pulled Benton's records, Thompson's garage papers, demographic forms, a photo ID. The young face in the black and white image stared at the lens, eyes cold and expressionless. Ruiz zoomed in, feeling a chill in that gaze, what Lang called coldly calm. Benton was questioned in 1979, passed a polygraph, and was released. He later left Chestnut Hollow, moved to Pittston, and opened a small repair shop. Tax and address records showed he stayed in Pennsylvania for 40 years. One detail stunned Ruiz: Pittston was less than 8 miles from Nanticoke, where Mary Ann's body was found. Ruiz presented her findings to Lieutenant DeLuca. He read, silent for a moment, then said, "If it's Benton, he's lived among us his whole life. Got anything else?" Ruiz shook her head. "Not yet, but I will." Parabon suggests cross-referencing the Ohio relative's DNA to expand the tree. DeLuca approved, and 2 weeks later, Ruiz flew to Columbus to meet Mrs. Linda Hollister, a 60-year-old, unaware she might be linked to a 40-year-old murder. Linda opened her suburban home's door, puzzled when Ruiz showed her badge. "I don't understand. Why are the police here?" Ruiz gently explained, showing the family tree and genetic connection. Linda covered her mouth. "My God, I've never heard of that girl, but I know a distant relative named Benton visited Luzerne as a kid." She signed a release for family genetic records. The meeting lasted 30 minutes, but as Ruiz left, she knew she was on the right path. Back in Harrisburg, Ruiz and Parabon analyzed the data. Results narrowed hundreds of relatives to 3 close branches, only one with a Benton in Luzerne County in 1979. Pieces fit like a puzzle. Benton, mechanic, blood type O, near the crime scene, now with a genetic link to the sample. Ruiz stared at the red lines on the family tree. At its center, Charles Benton's name stood out like old blood resurfacing. That night, she reread Lang's final case notes. A faded line, nearly lost to time. "If someone reads this after me, trust my hunch." Ruiz touched the words. In the dim light, she felt like she sat across from the old sheriff, 2 generations apart, both fixed on one face. She resolved to confirm it. The next day, Ruiz requested a warrant for indirect DNA collection, allowed if a suspect had prior administrative violations or left public biological traces. Records showed Benton was cited in 2005 for illegal parking. Local police had a fingerprint and a hair sample from his uniform during questioning. Ruiz sent an urgent request to the state lab, comparing the hair's DNA to the Hollis sample. 2 weeks later, results arrived. The first line, in bold, "DNA match confirmed. 100% correspondence with sample hash 79 Hollis." Ruiz sat still in her office. Outside, early snow fell on Harrisburg, white flakes slow and light as breath. She looked at the paper. 40 years, a hair, a glass vial, and now justice had a face. She whispered, "You were right, Sheriff Lang. Your hunch lived." She opened a new file, typing the first line of a report to Pennsylvania State. "DNA fully matches Charles Benton, Pittston resident, 64. Primary suspect in the Mary Ann Hollis murder." Her hands trembled as she typed. Not from fear, but from realizing she'd pulled the past into the present, along with the shadow of a winter dormant for 40 years. In January 2020, Agent Dana Ruiz drove north, leaving Harrisburg in Pennsylvania's gray winter fog. On Highway 309, snow blanketed the roadsides, wooden houses scattered among hills. 40 years ago, this was the heart of horror. Now it held a quiet, almost suspicious calm. A weathered "Welcome to Chestnut Hollow" sign appeared. Paint peeling, letters faded. Ruiz pulled over, scanning the small town. Everything seemed frozen in time. The old diner, First Baptist Church, faded storefronts. She opened her notebook, writing, back where it began. She met Pastor James Monroe, who hosted the 1979 Fall Festival. Now in his 70s, white-haired, he still led Sunday services. When Ruiz mentioned Mary Ann Hollis, his eyes flickered. "That girl," he smiled sadly. Kind, hard-working, always volunteered to clean up after services. I remember that night, she told me she'd head home early. It was cold. Ruiz asked, "Do you recall who stayed late after the festival?" Monroe thought. "Some kids, and Charles Benton. He fixed a leaking pipe in the church basement. Quiet, polite, always called me sir. No one thought he could do wrong." When I heard later, I couldn't believe it. Ruiz noted every word. As she left, Monroe added, almost to himself, "The devil doesn't always wear an ugly face, officer. Sometimes, it wears a smile." Ruiz walked the old Hollis neighborhood, now an empty house with broken windows and a leaning for sale sign. A neighbor, Mildred Kavanaugh, now 80, lived next door. When Ruiz asked about Benton, she laughed hoarsely. "Oh, Charlie? Such a good boy. I remember him fixing my pipes for free. Always helped when I carried heavy bags." No one believed he was a suspect. She poured tea slowly, voice lowering. But thinking back, something was off. After the girl's death, I didn't see Charlie. One November morning, I saw his red truck leave town. Thought he got a new job. Who knew? Ruiz looked up. "Do you recall the date?" Mildred frowned, digging through memory. "Maybe 2 weeks after they found her body." Ruiz wrote, underlining 3 times, "Left town 2 weeks after body found." The next day, she visited Edward Lang, the retired sheriff, nearly 40 years out of service. He lived in a small brick house in Scranton suburbs, walls lined with old photos. Lang walked slowly with a cane, but his eyes were sharp. When Ruiz introduced herself and mentioned the Hollis case, he sat, silent for a long time. "I thought no one remembered her," he said, voice rough but firm. Ruiz opened her briefcase, placing Benton's photo on the table. Lang's wrinkled hand trembled. "That guy," he sighed. "I knew him. I questioned him, but found nothing. He was calm, polite, completely clean. I had a bad feeling, but without evidence, a feeling means nothing in court." Ruiz said softly, "You weren't wrong. The DNA proved you right." Lang looked up, eyes wet. "Is that so?" He gave a dry laugh, shaking his head. "And I thought I'd failed. I was wrong to let it go." Ruiz stayed quiet, placing her hand on his. In the room thick with cigarette smoke and old paper, 2 generations of investigators, one who began, one who finished, shared the weight of 40 years' silence. That afternoon, Ruiz returned to Nanticoke, where Mary Ann's body was found. The mine was now a vacant lot, overgrown with weeds, a no trespassing sign tilting in the wind. She stood still, cold air stinging her face. She pictured the report's scene, a hand protruding from soil, a silver necklace catching faint light. All had sunk into the earth, but the silence remained as thick as 40 years ago. Ruiz knelt, picking up a small coal fragment, slipping it into her pocket, a symbolic keepsake of the past. That evening, she stopped at Maple Diner, the 1979 rumor hub. An older server, sensing she wasn't local, asked curiously, "You hear about that case?" Another reporter? Ruiz smiled. "No, I'm here to finish it." When she mentioned Benton, heads turned. A white-haired man said, "Charlie Benton? Lord, he's been a good guy all these years. Fixed our cars countless times. What's this about?" Ruiz replied briefly, "He might not be as good as you think." The diner's mood sank. Someone muttered, "God." That night Ruiz stayed at a small motel on the town's edge. She opened her laptop, reviewing the day's notes. Monroe's words, Kavanaugh's, Lang's. They formed pieces of an old map, each story a guiding thread. The timeline clarified. Mary Ann died mid-October. 2 weeks later, Benton left Chestnut Hollow, his garage closing without reason. He lived in Pittston since, quiet, clean, normal. She typed a final line. The killer didn't flee, just moved enough for time to do the rest. For the next 3 weeks, Agent Dana Ruiz stayed in Luzerne County, spending every hour in the county archive, reviewing the Hollis case evidence. The small storage room, dimly lit, reeked of old paper. On a wooden table, she spread yellowed evidence bags, each hand-labeled. One stopped her, a fabric scrap from the victim's scarf, stained with black grease Dr. Grayson noted as possible engine oil. Ruiz checked the technical file, reading, dark oil with molybdenum additive, used in heavy truck engines. She raised an eyebrow. Lang's old notes mentioned questioning Benton, a mechanic who worked on coal-hauling trucks using that exact oil. She took the evidence bag to the state lab in Wilkes-Barre for reanalysis. Under a microscope, the technician pointed to the dried oil. Preliminary chemical analysis shows Valvoline heavy-duty SAE-40, used mainly in 1970s diesel engines. Rare now, only old garages keep it. Ruiz nodded. I know one such garage, she said softly. She didn't need more. It was Thompson Auto Repair, where Benton worked in his 20s. Lang's final puzzle piece now had light: the oil, the shoes, and the man who left 2 weeks after Mary Ann's body was found. On Monday morning, Ruiz drove to Pittston, where Benton lived. She couldn't arrest him without a warrant, but she needed a direct DNA sample, irrefutable evidence. She parked across from a small weathered repair shop with a rusty sign, Benton's Auto Service. The door was open, the sound of hammers and the smell of motor oil wafting out, familiar and unsettling. A man in his 60s stepped out, stocky, with patchy gray hair, a tanned face, but still a hint of youth in his pale gray eyes. Ruiz recognized him instantly. Despite only seeing old photos, Charles Benton. She walked in, posing as a customer, her voice light. Hi, my car's making a weird noise when I brake, probably needs a look. Benton smiled warmly, as everyone had described. Bring it in, I'll check it out. As he bent to inspect the wheels, Ruiz scanned the shop. Cans of Valvoline heavy-duty oil lined the wall, their labels matching the 1979 case file's description. The heavy oil smell hung in the air, sending a shiver through her, as if time rewound, pulling her back to that cold 1979 night. After 10 minutes, Benton looked up. Just worn brake pads. You drive a lot on hilly roads? Ruiz nodded, smiling thanks. I travel far, sometimes don't even get coffee all day. Benton chuckled. Coffee keeps me going. He pointed to a steaming paper cup on the table. Ruiz eyed it, her expression calm, but her pulse racing. The cup, lip marks, saliva, was her chance. She pretended to take a call, stepped outside, spoke briefly into her phone, then returned, paying in cash. As Benton turned to grab a receipt, she quietly slipped the half-drunk cup into a sealed plastic bag inside her purse. Thanks, I'll be back for new pads, she said. Benton smiled. Any time. The shop door closed behind her. Ruiz stood in the cold, holding the small plastic bag with the case's most critical evidence in 40 years. She exhaled deeply, then drove straight to Wilkes-Barre, where the state lab ran 24/7. She handed the bag to a technician, noting, DNA collection via indirect sample. Subject, Charles Benton, Pittston. The technician nodded. We'll prioritize this. 4 days later, Ruiz was back in Harrisburg. She barely slept, waiting for the call. On Friday morning, it came. The technician's voice crackled. Agent Ruiz, we have results. The DNA from the coffee cup fully matches the 1979 Hollis case semen sample, 100% probability. Ruiz sank into her chair, feeling her heart clench. She stared at the faxed results. The bolded 1.0. All the silence, the waiting, the old file pages, led to this moment. She pulled Mary Ann's photo from the file, a faded Polaroid she always carried. She placed it beside the results, 2 generations separated by 40 years, and a DNA strand. Window light fell on the girl's face, her innocent smile buried in winter 1979, and the stark paper proving the truth. Ruiz's throat tightened, eyes stinging. She whispered, voice hoarse, "Justice still breathes, Mary Ann, and I hear it." That evening, Ruiz drove alone to Maple Hollow Bridge. Snow blanketed the surface, dim streetlights reflecting on the frozen river. She stepped out, cold wind stinging her face. The air held the same damp stillness described in the file. She looked at the black water, her heartbeat blending with the wind whistling through the bridge's slats. 40 years, she said softly, but secrets don't age. Back at the motel, Ruiz wrote a report for the Luzerne County Prosecutor's Office and State Bureau. DNA fully matches Charles Benton, sole suspect. Request immediate arrest and search warrant. She signed, closed the file, and looked at Marianne's photo one last time that night. Outside, snow began falling again. Silent, white, as if 1979's winter returned. But this time, it wasn't a winter of forgetting. It was a winter of truth. Early 2022, winter cloaked Luzerne County in a steel-like frost. In the Pennsylvania State Police headquarters in Harrisburg, a closed-door meeting took place on the fifth-floor conference room, doors locked, blinds shut. On the table lay stacks of documents, 1979 crime scene photos, a chestnut hollow map, and at the center, a white sheet with bold text. Match, Charles Benton, 100% probability. Agent Dana Ruiz presented her final report to FBI representatives, the Luzerne County prosecutor, and state police commanders. Her voice was calm, but her eyes held tension. Ladies and gentlemen, we have DNA, we have motive, and we have physical evidence matching the suspect's profession. Benton lived free for 43 years. But his traces didn't vanish, they just waited to be found. On the projector, Ruiz showed slides, the oil-stained fabric, the mind map, the genetic family tree, and finally a recent photo of Benton. A silver-haired man with a calm gaze, standing outside his Pittston shop. The cold light on his face silenced the room. Lieutenant Mark DeLuca, her direct superior, leaned on the table, whispering, "Are we certain?" Ruiz replied, "I've checked 3 times. All forensic and genetic data confirm. No room for error. This is the man who killed Marianne Hollis." An FBI representative, a stern middle-aged man, flipped through the file and said, "If so, we need a federal arrest warrant. The state's statute of limitations has passed, but first-degree murder has no deadline." Ruiz nodded. "I've prepared the warrant application. It just needs the prosecutor's signature." 2 days later, Ruiz was at the Scranton Federal Courthouse. She carried the thick file labeled 1979 CH Celis. Judge Eleanor K. Morris, known for her rigor, flipped through, asking, "Are you certain of the evidence chain of custody?" The sample was sealed properly for over 4 decades. Ruiz presented photos and records, her voice firm. "It bears Dr. Harold Grayson's 1979 signature, verified by the state lab, and corroborated by the 2021 analysis report. The seal was never broken. The chain is unbroken." The judge eyed her, then signed. The red stamp hit the paper with a cold thud. Ruiz exhaled. After 43 years, the case was officially reopened. The arrest plan was meticulous, timed to the minute. The FBI would seal the area. State police would handle approach and restraint. They chose 6:45 a.m., March 3, 2022, when Benton typically arrived early to brew coffee and start the oil heater. Ruiz joined as lead investigator and key witness. She knew this was the defining moment. Benton's life would end, and justice for Marianne would truly begin. The night before, Ruiz barely slept. Alone in her empty office, lamplight fell on the case file. She reopened Lang's report, reading his final line. "Insufficient evidence, but the hunch remains." She took a pencil, writing below. "That hunch now has a face." She looked at Marianne's photo, the 17-year-old's clear eyes meeting hers across 4 decades. "Tomorrow," Ruiz whispered, "we finish this." On March 3, 2022, Pennsylvania's sky was overcast, heavy as a lead blanket. Cold fog from Luzerne's hills drifted down the quiet street, where the faded Benton's auto service sign hung. Inside, neon light spilled onto the oil-stained cement floor. Charles Benton, 64, had opened the shop 10 minutes earlier. He wore a gray jacket, hands oil-streaked, coffee steam rising from a paper cup beside an old AM radio airing the weather. His face still bore the diligent mechanic's look, but his eyes lacked life. Empty, seeing through everything. Outside, last night's snow lingered, dusting the roof, and on the silent street, 4 black SUVs without plates pulled up. At 6:45 a.m., the shop door rattled as 2 FBI agents and state police entered. A handheld speaker blared in the cold space. "Charles Benton, This is the FBI and Pennsylvania State Police. You're under arrest for first-degree murder in the 1979 Mary Ann Hollis case. The sound echoed, bouncing off metal walls, fading into the smell of oil and coffee. Benton froze for half a second. He didn't turn, just slowly set down his wrench, wiping his hands on a rag, movements oddly deliberate. An agent repeated, voice sharp, hands on your head, face us. Benton turned, locking eyes with them. No anger, no surprise, just a faint smile tugging his lips. You're 40 years late, he said, voice low and rough. The words hung like a confession. The task force closed in, pulling his hands behind him, clicking cuffs. Ruiz stood at the door, in a thick coat, her breath steaming. As Benton was led out, she stepped forward, face to face. He looked at her, gray eyes like oil slick on water. You? He asked, voice curious yet mocking. Ruiz nodded. Yes. I'm the one who found you. Benton's lips tightened, eyes flickering. Good job. But you know, justice comes late. Sometimes it means nothing. Ruiz held his gaze, unflinching. Maybe to you, she said, but not to her. Benton lowered his head, smile gone. They let him out. The cuffs clinked softly in the fog. Neighbors opened doors, some in coats leaning on railings, eyes wide with shock. An elderly woman said to another, "My God, that's Charlie, the best mechanic on the street." A man shook his head. "No way, he's gentle as dirt." The scene unfolded in heavy silence. Ruiz followed the convoy to Pittston Station. Her phone rang non-stop. News spread fast. Within 15 minutes, local media caught wind. The Times Leader's website posted, "Arrest made in 1979 murder case, Pennsylvania cold case solved." After 43 years, a photo of Benton, head bowed, cuffed between two agents, went viral. Major outlets, Philadelphia Inquirer, CNN, ABC News covered it. One reporter wrote, Pittston mechanic arrested, suspected in Mary Ann Hollis murder, one of Luzerne County's oldest mysteries. In the holding room, cold light bathed Benton's face. He sat upright, hands on the metal table. Ruiz entered, followed by the prosecutor and an FBI agent. She opened the file, placing the DNA results before him. "Know what this is?" she asked. Benton glanced, skimming the match, 100% line, then looked up. "I'd say it's a one-way ticket." Ruiz nodded slightly. "Exactly. To Waymart." Benton exhaled, eyes drifting to the room's corner. "I've been waiting," he said. "Waiting for someone patient enough to come looking." She asked, "Why? Why her?" Benton went silent, lips tight. After a moment, he replied, voice dry. "You wouldn't understand. Back then, it was simple. Just a mistake I couldn't stop." She slid the file toward him. "No mistake lasts 43 years and gets to stay silent, Mr. Benton." Outside, reporters swarmed the station. Microphones, cameras, news vans crowded the lot. Police set up barriers to hold back the mob. Everyone wanted a shot of the man who lived an exemplary life in a small town, now escorted for killing a 17-year-old. Many didn't believe it. A neighbor said on live TV, "I've known him 30 years. He fixed cars free for poor students. No way he did this." But in the evidence room, DNA didn't lie. That afternoon, Benton was transferred to Luzerne County's detention center. As he walked the hall, he turned to Ruiz, voice low but clear. "Ever think, if you hadn't found that sample, I'd die a good man?" Ruiz replied, unwavering, "And she, Mary Ann, would stay a voiceless body. I just balanced the scales." As the convoy left, dozens of cameras flashed. Media called it a historic arrest, a DNA tech milestone, a moment Pennsylvania faced its past. Ruiz said nothing, watching through the car window. Outside, snow melted, dripping from the shop's roof, each drop steady, like the ticking of 43 years of waiting. In early May 2022, Luzerne County became Pennsylvania's focal point. TV stations endlessly covered the Mary Ann Hollis case, the 1979 murder, now nearing trial. Media dubbed it Luzerne County's first DNA cold case and one of the state's longest reinvestigations. While public fervor raged, quieter battles began in legal offices. Charles Benton, through his attorney Martin Cleary, pleaded not guilty. At the first hearing, Cleary stood, voice calm but sharp. The DNA evidence presented by the prosecution, Your Honor, was collected over 4 decades ago, with primitive equipment, stored in substandard conditions. We contend the sample was contaminated. No one can guarantee a 43-year chain of custody was untouched. He paused, scanning the packed courtroom of reporters, concluding, a man cannot be convicted on a dried droplet from an old glass vial. Murmurs filled the room. Ruiz, seated in the witness section, felt her fists clench. She knew Cleary was a seasoned lawyer who'd unraveled seemingly airtight cases. With Benton, he found fertile ground for doubt. Prosecutor Rachel Klein, leading the case, responded with cold calm. In a pretrial meeting, she said, "They'll attack the DNA's reliability. We need to prove it was never compromised, never lost integrity." Ruiz nodded. "I've got every record, from Dr. Grayson's 1979 signature to the sealing logs to the 2019 transfer photos. Not one link is broken." On June 22, the Wilkes-Barre County Courthouse held the evidence hearing. Hundreds packed the courtroom, some curious, others wanting to see the kindly mechanic of old. Ruiz sat beside Klein, facing stacks of files. Benton was led in, wearing a pale blue shirt, silver hair, eyes still calm. When the judge asked him to confirm his identity, he said simply, "I'm Charles Benton." Cleary began firmly, "The DNA sample, sealed for over 40 years. Your Honor, it's either a miracle or a fabrication." He held up a photo of the flooded 2008 evidence room, voice rising. "This is where that sample was stored, submerged in dirty water, moldy papers, damp walls, and they want us to believe that tiny glass vial somehow stayed pristine." He pointed at Benton. "My client has lived honorably for over 4 decades. No record, no violence, no sin. Yet because of a tarnished piece of the past, they want to bury his life. That's not justice. That's a craving to pin a crime, even if it means inventing a culprit." The courtroom hushed. The judge nodded. "Prosecution, your response." Klein stood. "Your Honor, the sample's chain of custody has been verified by 3 independent agencies. The evidence isn't just a glass vial. We have 1979 lab logs, Grayson's signature, 2019 transfer confirmation, and photos of the seal witnessed by myself and Agent Ruiz." She paused, scanning the room, then signaled Ruiz forward. Ruiz took the stand, detailing, "In 2019, when I opened the evidence box, the sealing tape was intact, bearing Dr. Grayson's signature. I personally oversaw the sample's transfer to Parabon Nanolabs. No one touched the vial except authorized technicians. It was stored at -20 degrees Celsius, controlled humidity, per national protocols. The DNA yielded a 100% match to Charles Benton. Random match probability, 1 in 9 trillion. Cleary objected. "Your Honor, Agent Ruiz isn't a forensic expert. She's not qualified to assess sample integrity." The judge nodded, summoning Dr. Evelyn Park, Parabon's geneticist. When Park entered, the room fell silent. She explained precisely, "Modern genetic analysis can nearly fully reconstruct DNA from small samples. We confirmed no contamination, no cross-sample, no structural alteration. The results are 100% accurate. This 1979 sample, with current technology, can be traced with absolute precision." Cleary went quiet. In that moment, Ruiz felt the courtroom tilt her way. Light hit Mary Ann Hollis's projected photo, her eyes vividly gazing at the audience. The judge's gavel struck, concluding, "The court recognizes the DNA evidence validity. The case will proceed to full trial this summer." The gavel's sound was dry and heavy, like a bell. As the hearing ended, reporters spilled outside. One shouted into a camera, "The Hollis case is the first to show how genetic tech breaks time's limits." Another added, "This is Luzerne County's first DNA cold case, July 2023. Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania." Summer sun scorched the county courthouse square. Hundreds lined the sidewalk from dawn, crowding to attend what media called the case that waited 43 years to be heard. Local TV set up cameras at the entrance, reporters broadcasting live, microphones jostling. The courthouse was guarded like a federal case. At the courtroom's center, the defendant's chair sat under yellow light, where Charles Benton, 65, sat silently, hands cuffed, eyes empty. Agent Dana Ruiz stood in the hallway, peering through a fogged window, holding the worn case file. She heard reporters calling her name outside, but didn't turn. Over 4 years since she reopened the Hollis case, everything now led to this moment. She thought of Mary Ann, of Edward Lang, of Elaine Hollis, the aged mother in the front row, her wrinkled face lit by eyes burning with the hope of a lifetime's wait for an answer. 9 a.m. Judge Margaret Delaney entered. The gavel struck 3 times. The Luzerne County trial of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania versus Charles Benton is now in session. The room fell silent. Prosecutor Rachel Klein stood, opening succinctly, "Your Honor, today we don't just try a man, we try time itself." All eyes fixed on her. For 43 years, justice slept. Only through a single drop of DNA could we awaken it. Defense attorney Martin Cleary sat, arms crossed, face cold. He looked to the jury, speaking softly. "My client is an ordinary working man, living among you, helping neighbors, never harming anyone. Now he's dragged here over an old glass vial sample. We're judging the past with future technology, and the past can't defend itself." Ruiz sat behind the prosecution table, her heart burning. She knew they'd play on emotion, on pity, something juries easily swayed to. But she also knew truth had its own weight, carried in every number, every DNA image. The trial spanned days. Forensic experts testified the sample was intact. The sealing process, the storage conditions. They projected DNA sequences, 2 parallel strands, matching 100%. Clear as twin fates. The judge nodded. Jurors scribbled furiously. In the back, the crowd held its breath. When the screen dimmed, Ruiz heard Elaine Hollis stifle a sob, her hand clutching a worn silver rosary. On the 6th day, Ruiz was called as the key witness. She took the stand, swore the oath, and faced the jury. Her voice was steady, each word heavy, with 4 decades. "I reopened the Mary Ann Hollis case in 2019. I found the 1979 sealed glass vial, signed by Dr. Harold Grayson. I oversaw the sample's transfer and analysis. That DNA led us to Charles Benton." Cleary approached, eyes sharp as knives. "Agent Ruiz, had you ever met Benton before?" "No." "Do you have physical evidence beyond DNA to incriminate him? Witnesses? Signs of a struggle? A weapon?" Ruiz stayed calm. "No, sir, but DNA doesn't need witnesses. It is the witness." Cleary narrowed his eyes. "You say that because you trust science, or because you need a win?" Ruiz looked straight, voice firm. "Because I trust the dead." The room hushed. The judge tapped her gavel, calling for order. Cleary returned to his table, face cold. But Ruiz knew she'd planted what she needed: belief. That afternoon, the prosecution displayed Mary Ann Hollis's photo, a girl with brown hair, bright eyes, smiling in her graduation dress. "This is who Charles Benton killed," Klein said, voice breaking. "He lived peacefully in this town for 40 years, ate at the same diner, greeted neighbors, attended church, while she lay in cold ground. If this isn't a crime to be answered, then nothing is justice." Benton sat still, unblinking. Throughout the trial, he'd said little beyond his initial plea. "I didn't do it." But his face, distant gaze, tight lips, seemed to accept that defenses were futile. Ruiz watched, and for the first time, she saw not cold calm in his eyes, but exhaustion, as if he knew it was time to stop. When both sides rested, the judge handed the case to the jury. They left for deliberation at 5 p.m. Outside, the sun faded, rain began. Ruiz sat in her seat, heart pounding with each minute. She saw Elaine Hollis praying, lips moving. "Please God, don't make her wait longer." 7 o'clock, 8, the clock crawled. Reporters sat scattered, holding coffee, exhausted. Ruiz looked at Mary Ann's photo on the table, her eyes still bright, smile intact, as if waiting to be called. At 11:18 p.m., the deliberation room door opened. The 12 jurors returned, faces grave. The judge called them to stand. Has the jury reached a verdict? Yes, Your Honor. On the charge of first-degree murder against Charles Benton, how do you find? The jury foreman looked at the paper, voice clear. Guilty. Benton didn't react. He stared at Ruiz, eyes empty as a dry lake. In that moment, she saw no power, no mystery, just collapse. A lifetime of posing as a good man turned to dust. 2 officers approached, cuffed him, and led him away. The door closed, metal clinking faintly before fading. Ruiz stood, hands trembling, breathing deeply. Reporters rushed her. Camera flashes blinding. Someone asked, "Agent Ruiz, any comment on the verdict?" She paused, looked into the camera, voice choked. Justice doesn't die, it just sleeps long. The next morning, headlines blared, Benton convicted. Justice after 43 years. A photo of Ruiz wiping tears in the courtroom graced front pages. Elaine Hollis sat beside her, clutching the silver rosary, head bowed, light streaming through the courthouse window, like a streak of grace. As the crowd left, Ruiz lingered, walking to the witness stand, touching the cold table. She scanned the empty courtroom, where hundreds had cried, raged, believed, doubted. All sound was gone, save the wall clock's tick. She whispered, unsure to whom, 43 years, and now you can rest, Mary Ann. A week after the verdict, Chestnut Hollow awoke to a still summer morning. News of the case still dominated papers, from Wilkes-Barre to Scranton, even Philadelphia. The Times leader's front page showed Mary Ann Hollis in her white dress at 17. Beside a bold headline, Justice after 43 years. Below, smaller text read, Hollis family returns to Chestnut Hollow, justice finally named. That day, the sky was strikingly blue. Townsfolk lined the road to Greenwood Cemetery, nestled under old pines. They watched a slow procession. Elaine Hollis, leaning on a cane, walked between her eldest son and youngest daughter. Over 80, frail but steady, she held a bouquet of white chrysanthemums, tied with a green ribbon. Since Mary Ann's death, this was the Hollis family's first return to the town that had swallowed their girl's youth. The simple grave sat on a slope, facing the Susquehanna River, its gray stone etched, Mary Ann Hollis 1962, 1979. She never came home, but she was found. Elaine knelt, placing the flowers on the grass. Her trembling hand touched the inscription, lips moving as if speaking to someone. You see, Mary Ann, they finally believed me. They heard you. Tears rolled down her wrinkled cheeks, but a smile broke through, relieved, as if shedding a lifelong burden. Her son knelt, arm around her, voice thick. You've waited long enough, Mom. A few townsfolk stood quietly afar. Former classmates of Mary Ann, now gray-haired, eyes sunken, shared an unspoken emotion. A middle-aged woman whispered to another, 43 years, and I still remember her laugh at the church festival. Now she can rest. Meanwhile, over 100 miles away, Charles Benton entered Waymart's high-security prison in northern Pennsylvania. He wore a gray inmate uniform, silent. News reported briefly, Benton files no appeal. Attorney confirms client accepts life sentence. A reporter asked defense lawyer Cleary, why no appeal? Cleary replied, some don't need an appeals court to know they're guilty. In the prison file, Benton was assigned to the elderly inmate wing. The first report noted, cooperative, quiet, no disruptions. He spent most hours in the library, reading technical books and listening to the radio. When asked if he wanted visitors, he shook his head. A guard recounted, I asked if he regretted anything. He said, no one lives long enough to fix the past. Then he fell silent, eyes gazing through the bars at Waymart's ashen sky. Back in Chestnut Hollow, that evening, the First Baptist Church bell rang. Pastor Monroe held a brief prayer service, telling the congregation, God's justice never fades. it just takes a detour. Townsfolk lit candles around a restored memorial for Mary Ann in the churchyard. A small bronze plaque with a chrysanthemum and the words, "She was loved. She is remembered." Candlelight flickered in the breeze, reflecting on faces both serene and guilty. Someone whispered, "If only we'd believed her sooner." Agent Dana Ruiz returned to the town 2 days later, unannounced. At dusk, she visited the cemetery. The sky a pale gold. Elaine was still there, alone on a stone bench by the grave. Ruiz approached, wordlessly placing a white lily down. Elaine turned, smiling. Her eyes softened. "You gave my girl a voice. I'm not afraid of the night anymore." Ruiz sat beside her. They stayed silent, listening to the wind through the pines. After a while, Elaine said softly, "I used to hate this town, but maybe it was hurt as much as I was." Ruiz replied, "Justice came late, but it came home." As the sun set, Ruiz stood, looking at the headstone one last time. White chrysanthemums swayed in the breeze. She knew she wouldn't return, but part of her would stay, like a promise to the departed. That night, Wilkes-Barre TV aired a case wrap-up. The reporter said, "After over 4 decades, the Mary Ann Hollis case is closed. Defendant Charles Benton sentenced to life. The victim's family laid flowers at her grave, and Chestnut Hollow, once haunted by fear and silence, has finally found peace." The final image showed the cemetery at dusk, golden light on the graves, wind scattering white petals. Ruiz watched the broadcast in her Harrisburg apartment. When the screen went dark, she sat still, hearing the steady tick of her clock. She opened her old notebook, the Hollis case's final page. Below "Case closed, July 2023, she wrote, "Justice doesn't vanish. It just needs someone patient enough to wait." Outside, night fell. Summer wind blew through the window, carrying a gentle warmth. In the north, at Greenwood Cemetery, a candle by Mary Ann's grave still burned, its small steady flame a reminder that some things, even after 43 years, are worth the wait. The story of Mary Ann Hollis and the over 40-year journey to find the truth is not just a personal tragedy, but a mirror for modern American society, where justice may come late, but never fades. In today's America, where trust in the legal system and authorities often wavers, this case reminds us that technology can change the world, but it's people, with persistence and faith, who keep justice alive. Agent Dana Ruiz refused to let a cold case become forgotten. She represents those who believe that, though time may dust over everything, truth endures beneath the frost, waiting for someone brave enough to unearth it. In the U.S., where tens of thousands of unsolved cases sit in storage, this story urges individuals, especially those in justice, not to lose empathy and patience. The Hollis family's 43-year wait, the community's silence, and Benton's calm gaze, the devil in workers' clothes, remind us that evil doesn't always wear a clear dark mask, and indifference is complicity. The deepest lesson America can draw from this story is justice needs science's intellect, but more so, the heart of humanity. We must learn to hear voices silenced by time, for as Ruiz said, justice doesn't die, it just sleeps long. Thank you for following the journey to reclaim justice for Mary Ann Hollis, a story showing that truth can be buried, but never lost. Please subscribe to the channel to catch more cases where the past still has words to speak, and justice is still being awakened.